Uh, Make sure your mute is on when you're not speaking. If you have questions for our speaker, you can enter them in chat. And we will be using the chat feature for voting or using our hands. And you would have a better experience if you put your view on gallery for the main part of the meeting. So then you will see just the speaker and the presentation by our guest speaker. With that, I wanted to say that usually we have our annual meetings. We had our annual meetings prior to COVID, where we met together in person in the Friends Room of the library, and we enjoyed each other's company and had food and beverages, and we conducted our annual meeting. And we haven't been able to do that for 2 years. So this evening, I hope you have brought your favorite beverage and some snack or dessert so you can enjoy our, me too, enjoy our annual meeting and enjoy our excellent speaker and other presentations. I did want to say that next year, we hope to have a hybrid annual meeting, which would be holding it in the library, which now has capabilities for doing Zoom also. So we'll have the best of both worlds next year. With that, before I introduce our guest speaker, I wanted to take a moment to introduce and thank each of our board members for all their work and effort in this past year, and also introduce committee members who are not on the board. So I'll just go through it, and I have to switch mine to view 2, speaker view. I'm Barbara Hoppe, and I'm also the Lunch and Learn Chair and the President of the League of Women Voters. Next is Mari Scala, is First Vice President. She's also the Chair of the Health and the Mental Health Committee. Mari, can you say hi and everyone can see you?
Hi, I hope you can see me. I'm waving. My husband Carl is in the background here, so he's waving too. So please count him toward the quorum.
And then the second Vice President is Diane Suler. Is Diane here?
Not yet.
Not yet. Then our secretary is Carol Schreiber, who is also the voter service chair. Carol.
Hello and welcome.
And then our elected board directors that have served this year are Elaine Blodgett. Elaine, are you here?
Not yet.
Okay. Kate Canterbury. Kate.
Hi.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for your work. Then there's Meredith Donaldson, who is our membership chair. Meredith. Oh.
I want to welcome all new members.
And then Marilyn McLeod, who was the past president of the League of Women Voters, is still on our board and is our main, maintains the website and is our spokesperson for Paul Pepper Show. Marilyn. You there, Marilyn?
Good to see everybody.
And then there's Renee Powell, who's on the board. Renee, are you here?
Not yet.
Not yet. And then Sharon Schneeberger, who's on the board and who has been amazing redistricting chair for both the local league and the state league.
Barbara, don't forget Ruth.
Okay.
She's here.
Oh, Ruth. Yeah, I've got her. I missed saying Ruth. You're right here, Ruth. Ruth Millage is our treasurer. Ruth. You want to say hi?
Hi.
Oh, okay. We can't. And then next, we have Pam Springsteel, who is the Hospitality and Chair and the Civil Liberties Chair.
Good
Pam.
evening.
And then we have appointed director, Dick Parker, who is the Energy and Climate Chair. Dick, can you say hi?
Hi, and show up at Earth Day Sunday.
And then I wanted to introduce or say thank you to our committee chairs who are not on the board. David Luthold, the Budget Chair. I think David's here.
Good evening, yes, I'm here.
And then Zona Burke, the Education Chair, new this year. Doing a wonderful job. She's not here, I guess. Then we have Susan Koenig, the ERA Chair. Is Susan here?
No,
No. Linda Smith, Voter Registration Chair. I thought I saw Linda, but
yes, she's here.
and then last but not least, she's not a chair, but she does a lot of work and does a great job on our voter newsletter, Ava Fagan. Is Ava here? Fagan? I guess not. Okay, well, with that, thank you so much to the board and the chair for all the work you've done this year. With that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker for this evening.
Barbara, let me say one thing
yeah.
before David begins. If you will go to that place that says view and put it on speaker, you will get to see David much
yeah.
better.
I'm on that.
Well, he hasn't started talking yet.
Oh, okay. So I'd like to introduce our guest speaker today, Professor David S. Mitchell, who will speak on voter suppression or protection, the impact of voting law changes. And David Mitchell is co-director of the Michael A. Middleton Center for Race, Citizenship, and Justice. He's the Ruth Huston Professor of Law at the University School of Law. He's an interdisciplinary scholar and examines the criminal justice system using a sociological lens, specifically focusing on the collateral consequences of sentencing, ex-offender reentry and reintegration, and felon disenfranchisement. But I also did a little digging besides his more academic efforts. He is the advisor to the Undergraduate Black Pre-Law Student Association, and he teaches street law class at Douglas High School in Columbia. And he is a member of the Missouri State Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. With that, I give you David. Welcome, David Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Thanks, Rachel, there for highlighting my son and his efforts. It's good to live in a house with someone who does research on felon disenfranchisement, because that was his topic for History Day. But all the research and all the interviewing was totally his. I just got to be interviewed by my son, which was quite a surreal experience, I have to say. One slight correction, Barbara, it's actually S. David Mitchell. I'm one of those quirky people who initializes his first name. So just because I live in a household and my dad had the same first name, so that would have been way too confusing going in our house.
Thanks for the correction.
Oh, no worries. All right, well, it is a pleasure certainly to speak. I love an opportunity to engage, to particularly talk about this topic. I work, or the majority of my work is on felons and ex-offenders, formerly incarcerated. But tonight I want to sort of talk about voting, and particularly the voting law changes that we've seen around the country, that are currently being proposed, that are proposed certainly in Missouri, and what does that really mean for us and for the process. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully, of course, it still works. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Great. All right. Okay. So voting suppression or voter protection, the impact of voting law changes. And so when we begin sort of talking about this issue, the idea, or what I begin, is this notion of this is a crisis of our democracy. I don't think it's hyperbole. I don't think it's sort of vitriol or rhetoric to talk about it in that way. And depending upon whether it is a lack of faith in the system based upon the continued promulgation of a big lie, or whether it's a lack of faith in the system in the aftermath now of countless legislative proposals seeking to change the rules around voting and enfranchisement. In the past, whether we sort of wanted to agree with this or not, we've been very comfortable with certain forms of disenfranchisement. Right, as I talked about with my work, certainly with the formerly incarcerated, we had a whole host of individuals that until maybe the last decade and a half, that folks really didn't mind excluding them from the franchise. We've begun more and more to look at this impact of these individuals being excluded from the system and the impact on their communities, and found that to be sort of problematic. But of course, individuals who are under the age of 18, non-citizens, and those who may be mentally incapacitated. And so we have a category of individuals that we sort of see outside the voting framework. But now, of course, this sort of exclusion of voters, of citizens from casting their ballot is now broadened, and it's created this sort of framework of how do we engage with this process, given all these different proposals that are sort of certainly coming about. So when we think about the right to vote, there are certain sort of modern day presumptions, I would say, under which we operate, right? The right to vote is clearly an important one. It's one in which we identify one person, one vote. The idea behind that, of course, is universal suffrage. And the exercise of this right is incredibly important because it serves to demarcate who has a voice in how the country shall be governed and who shall be responsible for governing, right? It indicates who has membership in the polity and who does not. This right is so important that it is regarded as a fundamental right, and any governmental infringement upon it must be based upon a compelling state interest. Moreover, when the court reviews changes that impact this right, it does so using a strict scrutiny standard of review to assess the changes, such that anything that infringes upon this must be compelling, and it must be viewed with the sharpest critical lens of the court to determine whether or not it is necessary to exist. Now, following the 2020 election, as we are all aware, the narrative that was promulgated by the losing party was that the election was stolen, that there was fraud in the process, even though fraud was never found. Some of it was based on the assumption that a change in voting procedures to accommodate a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic resulted in overwhelming turnout, as opposed to grassroots efforts to get out the vote because folks were, in effect, upset with the current sort of political party. In response, states have proposed legislation in a concerted effort to negate voter turnout under the guise of protecting the integrity of the ballot box and in the name of democracy. And in fact, that very phrase, protecting the integrity of the ballot box, has often been used when folks have talked about the disenfranchisement of the formerly incarcerated, as if somehow individuals who are citizens, because of their conviction, would somehow taint the process. Now, the notion of the integrity of the box is such that casting a ballot means what it's to cast a ballot, which are not sort of, if you will, in-person, traditional, in a polling place, is problematic. Now, much of the information that I'll be talking about tonight, I've drawn from the Brennan Center for Justice, which I think is a fantastic resource for talking about voting rights, as well as some other sort of places. And many of the bills we were talking about have been pre-filed, carried over, they're newly proposed, and they're characterized as either being restrictive or expansive. The basic takeaway, however, is that there's an overwhelming focus on this incredibly important right. The landscape is complex and nuanced, and the very notion of disenfranchising a single voter, however, because of such practices, is antithetical to the very principles, if not the actual practice, of voting in the United States. So, expanding the franchise. The franchise, of course, was not universal, as we all know, right? In effect, we needed constitutional amendments, we needed statutory rules to change, to make the franchise that which was a universal sort of process. And so we see from the 15th Amendment, the 19th, the 24th, and the 26th, these were all rules that allowed, if you will, greater participation in the franchise, in the process itself. Right, we took away issues based upon conditions of previous servitude, on account of gender or sex. And then, of course, poll taxes being used to deny individuals. And then, of course, on age, right? So we've got race, we've got gender, we've got socioeconomic status, and we've got sort of age of individuals. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, no voting qualification or prerequisite to voting shall be imposed or applied by any state or political subdivision in a manner which results in a denial or abridgment of the right of any citizen of the U.S. to vote on account of race or color. Now we have these sort of statutes and the constitutional amendments, and we've seen the current attack, and we've seen the Supreme Court uphold, particularly in cases like Shelby versus Holder, if you will, removing the very rules to assure that voting was still a universal process and one that could not be infringed upon sort of in each jurisdiction. And we've seen, if you will, the eating away of the franchise of its vast universality, step by step, sort of jurisdiction by jurisdiction and rule by rule in very sort of insidious ways. When we talk about voter suppression, all right, so the definition is any behavior intended to deter an eligible voter from casting a ballot. Major suppression tactics have been direct threats or intimidation. Disinformation, which I think is incredibly important given the current social media age, right? Thinking about Russian bots and social media and Facebook and that particular aspect. Or scare tactics, disruption of an opponent's lines of communication, and challenging someone's right to vote. So the strategy here is quite clear, that in effect, you interfere with an individual's right to cast a ballot, to exercise a fundamental right, and you do so in a way that therefore suppresses their right to vote and makes them feel as though they are ineligible to cast a ballot, and thus creating them on the outside. Now that's the backdrop to sort of where we are, right? That's sort of, if you will, the background to how we get to where we are today. And so I posit the first sort of, if you will, set of rules and legislation proposed changes as voter suppression or necessary restrictions. Prohibition on sending unsolicited mail ballots or ballot applications. So at the national level, we've seen, right, at least 6 bills, and this is sort of most recently taken in the sort of the, if you will, survey of laws within February 2022, that at least 6 bills in 5 states would prohibit election officials from sending out mail ballots or ballot applications unless a voter has affirmatively requested one. So without affirmative request, in effect, it makes it, it prohibits individuals from sending out these particular ballots. In Missouri, individuals will be subject to criminal prosecution. So it's not just a violation of voting rules, it criminalizes the conduct. So consider that, right? An election official seeks to send out, if you will, a mail-in ballot, and now that simple act is now criminalized. And so it basically puts it halts, if you will, the process to ensure greater inclusion in the voting process. Grounds for rejecting mail ballots, right? Washington and New Jersey and Missouri. So Missouri would allow mail ballots to be rejected if the signature does not appear to be valid, a vague reason with no clear standards. So what does it mean to have an invalid signature? Now, I don't know about you, but whenever I sign my name now, it probably comes out in 5 different ways because I rarely sign anything anymore, right? Everything is electronic. And if I have to actually put my signature down, it may not look the same if I do it multiple times. But then who is assessing the validity? And what are they holding it up against? What is the, if you will, the standard by which they are judging someone's valid signature? When I signed my voter registration card some 5 or 7 years before, or something new? Stricter voter ID laws. This, of course, garnered a great deal of press several years ago, right? The idea fundamentally was that individuals quite simply needed a form of ID to demonstrate whether or not they were eligible to vote. And so at the national level, we see places like Virginia or Illinois, New Hampshire, and Arizona, right? Virginia, of course, requiring photos for student IDs, even on IDs that are issued by the school itself. We see new in-person voter ID laws. We see bills that propose new voter registration forms, bills that would reduce the list of acceptable forms of ID in Arizona to a voter ID card and 2 of the following: a signature, a fingerprint, or an undefined unique security code, right? And then, of course, in Missouri, bills would eliminate the option for a voter to cast a regular ballot by executing a statement of their identity or affidavit if they do not possess acceptable voter IDs, right? And so this, quite frankly, these particular rules and others go to the sort of the mantra that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. There has never been a problem with identifying individuals through other means other than a photo ID to determine whether or not they are the person to whom they say they are. sorry. Voting with disabilities, with a disability. Virginia bills would repeal state laws that currently allows a person who requests assistance by reason of a physical disability or an inability to read or write to receive assistance with completing an in-person ballot or in-person application. And it will repeal what's called the permanent absentee voter list, so that rather than having someone on that list, right, now they've got to actually reapply annually to be put back on the absentee ballot list again, year after year after year. Or in Washington, eliminating existing state law requirements to provide access, right? Bills will require in Missouri that the caretaker of an individual with an illness or disability reside at the same address as that individual to vote absentee. So consider the undue burden that we are placing upon individuals who take care of folks with disabilities. The caretaker having to live with the person in Missouri in order to allow that individual to assist, not providing for someone who is blind or someone who is physically disabled the opportunity, right? Under other statutory frameworks, this would be illegal in any other context, right? Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, you couldn't do these things. And yet we are allowing this with respect to this most precious of rights itself, right? In this particular context. Voter education. Indiana would repeal a bill, an existing law that requires voters who cast a provisional ballot to be informed on how to ensure their ballot is counted. Informing people of the process on how to have their ballot counted is proposed to be repealed, right? Giving them information, or repealing an existing law that requires the Secretary of State to provide advance notice of the identification requirements for voting in elections in our jurisdiction, right? These simply do not make sense. In fact, the idea here is if you're talking about protecting the right to vote, then it means providing the greatest amount of access and opportunity. It means getting people to the polls. It means ensuring that they have the opportunity to cast their ballot and allowing the democratic process to occur, rather than creating every step or obstacle in its way to sort of prevent that, to forestall that from happening. We see new citizenship requirements, Arizona, Virginia, and Washington. They proposed 5 bills for new proof of citizenship requirements. And then the Washington bill would require county auditors to cancel the registration of all voters who have not previously shown proof of ID of citizenship by obtaining an enhanced driver's license or state ID. And then it would only give voters notice and opportunity to cure them by going to the auditor's office in person and presenting a passport, birth certificate, or certificate of naturalization. Now, for some of us, the luxury of being able to leave our jobs in the middle of the day and go to the auditor's office in order to secure or correct this is a luxury that we have, right? I've often identified, quite frankly, that voting, quite frankly, is a middle-class luxury right. The idea that if you are of a particular class background, right, to be able to follow all of these rules, to be able to remedy those which may be problems, is something which you can take time out. If you are, however, at a job in which you cannot do that, you are often therefore excluded, unless they are making opportunities on weekends in order to do so, or after work hours or before work hours. But even then, it means creating a framework and resources that will allow individuals an opportunity. That's right. So this first set of sort of laws, the Brennan Center talks about as being the restrictive laws, right? These are the necessary restrictions, and I put necessary in quotes, because this is what is being promulgated to say that this is going to protect the integrity of the ballot box, even though there has never been any definable or identifiable voter fraud data that shows that voter fraud is a problem. It's a solution in search of a problem. And it's not even a really good solution. In fact, what it is a pretext for retaining political power. It's not about the polity. It's not about enfranchisement. This is about the retention of political power and how do you reverse the most recent trend of who's voting for whom. All right, voter protection or expanding access. Now, simultaneously, what we see is, and this is the complexity and the nuance that's involved with these particular laws itself. So Florida, we see, would provide for prepaid postage stamps on mail ballot return envelopes. Excellent, right? The idea here, give folks an opportunity to do so, then have to go out buy a stamp. It's also going to incorporate an application to vote by mail in the online registration application and remove the current prohibition. Arizona, extending the deadline to receive and count mail ballots from 7 o'clock on election day up to 5 days after election day, as long as the ballot was postmarked 6 days before election day. right? This, of course, quite frankly, allows us to escape or get past the current failures of the United States Postal Service and its inability to deliver things on time, right? We recognize that that's a problem, and yet we're still using an antiquated process of saying election ballots have to be in on this particular date in order to be counted, right? Repealing one of the provisions at issue in the Vernokovich versus Democrat National Committee case, which imposes criminal penalties on individuals other than a voter's family, household member, or caregiver to assist them. And then Pennsylvania and Vermont providing voters notice of a signature mismatch and letting them cure the defect itself. And New Jersey creating a process for voters to correct a mail ballot as missing their voter affidavit. And of course, Missouri, along with two other states, establishing no excuse absentee voting with other rules that sort of attach, right? So we see concurrently rules that are restrictive and rules that are expansive. And the problem is that this patchwork of changes creates in the mind of the voter an inability to ascertain whether or not they are in compliance. Rather than making it far more simpler and understandable by most individuals, more comprehensible, we've made it far complex, too complex, quite frankly. So voter rights restorations, we see this. Mississippi, right? These are sort of, if you will, for restoring the rights of the formerly incarcerated. Currently, Mississippi permanently disenfranchised individuals, yet in Mississippi, there's a pathway for restoration. The bill in Florida is actually one that's being proposed to actually give honor to the amendment that was passed, which was fundamentally gutted by the state itself by saying, no, we're not going to restore folks until all their fees and fines are paid. And so what it did was that it actually thwarted the will of the people with the amendment in the passage of the amendment by saying, here's a post hoc, if you will, poll tax based upon what you owe to the court itself. And so hopefully that sort of addressed that issue. Then, of course, automatic restoration in Virginia. Missouri would restore voting rights to persons on probation or parole after a felony conviction without the sort of the completion thereof. Voters with disabilities, we see New Hampshire require voter registration to be discussed as part of an education or accommodations plan for students with disabilities. Rhode Island extending the deadline for voters with certain disabilities to request a mail ballot. And then Indiana allow voters with disabilities to join a permanent absentee voter list. Missouri, of course, requiring at least one voting machine per polling location for use by voters who are blind or visually impaired in election regions, with more than 330,000 residents, and so on. And so we recognize the value that we need, in effect, or addressing individuals who may be unable to cast a ballot on their own, the assistance that is therefore required to allow citizens this very important right to sort of occur. We see easier voter registration in some places. So bill would also extend the deadline to register to vote from 29 days before an election to 14 days. 6 states are considering bills that would allow eligible individuals to register to vote on election day. And then we see bills that would institute or expand pre-registration for under 18-year-olds and bills to allow for online voter registration. And then, of course, bills that would allow for registered voters to electronically submit changes to their registration. Now, those slate of bills, in conjunction with a host of others, is the framework under which we are currently operating to address, if you will, the right to vote across the country and in Missouri. And there is a wealth of laws going back and forth determining when someone can vote, when they cannot, who's to exist, who's to be permissible or not. But then we also see what is probably the most dangerous part of these new sort of bills, and those are dealing fundamentally or solely with the electoral process. Now, before I talk about that, right, the big push that we've heard, of course, we heard, about Georgia and other jurisdictions, and we heard about lines with respect to voting lines and not being able to give water to voters or food. This context that you can't sort of, feed and sort of give water to individuals who on voter lines. And the issue here is that it's been encapsulated in sort of a rule or reason that says giving water or food is basically giving an individual some kind of benefit to vote on your behalf, as opposed to ensuring that folks who are standing on lines in areas, often in jurisdictions that don't have enough polling places or polling machines, that they don't get disenchanted with the process and leave, right? It's making voting comfortable in a way that we don't do it already, right? It's not a national holiday. We don't extend the time, greatly. We give people limited amounts of time. We've taken away polling places in certain areas. And so we do a lot of things to make this more difficult, and yet things that would make it easier, allowing individuals to sort of engage in this process of bringing folks food and comfort, is something that we have determined, at least in some places, to be problematic. Now, the last piece is about the electoral process and what sort of is being proposed to address that. So, and this, quite frankly, while the other rules I think are incredibly sort of dangerous as well and insidious in terms of what they are trying to accomplish, I think the following is even more problematic if you take a look at it. So, citizen-initiated audits. So, in New Hampshire, the bill would impose a new requirement that digital images of all ballots cast by voters be made publicly available for any citizen to perform a citizen's audit by comparing the official count to the ballot images. It would not be subject to any pre-written standards for accuracy or reliability, which means what are you judging it by, right? How are you assessing it? Making them available would enable any person, including partisan actors and individuals acting in bad faith, unchecked the ability to produce their own misleading and manipulative analysis. And in Virginia, it was allowed for any elected official, part of the jurisdiction, any election official in the jurisdiction, or any voter to initiate an audit of county or city election results. In Missouri, the bill being proposed would allow any registered voter to request an audit of an election if the request is signed by over 5% of registered voters in designated district. Now consider what this means. This means now that if there are citizen-initiated audits of the electoral process, the certification of elections and votes is going to be even more delayed than it currently is. And so now it means looking even further and having individuals potentially manufacture a non-issue from this particular auditing process, placing, if you will, the power in the citizens' hands in this particular context. I don't think actually lends to any credence or faith in the system, other than simply allowing folks the power to challenge at will what is a valid and legitimate sort of electoral process. Future audits of elections. In Washington, the bill would allow the legislature to authorize an independent forensic audit. There provides no pre-written comprehensive standards. The bill would establish in Missouri a process for appointing an election integrity committee that is tasked with implementing a random auditing system, right, to examine this. Once again, no pre-written comprehensive standards for conducting the audit. So that's like walking in, quite frankly, to a test or an exam and not knowing what the rules are. There's nothing to assess what is valid and what is not valid. There's nothing to indicate what is going to be determining, if you will, the standards to assess whether or not this is a valid ballot. It's the valid electoral process. Then, of course, there are bills that are offered to establish, and which I think is probably even far more silencing, if you will, of electoral officials, prosecutorial authority related to elections. So in Arizona, for example, it's going to establish the Bureau of Elections within the governor's office. It's empowered to enforce election law through investigations and by pursuing civil and criminal penalties. I find it very curious in a country that is so unwilling to remove qualified immunity for the shooting deaths of individuals that we are going to move in an area that we are going to enforce civil and criminal penalties for an election process here in this instance. This is one of those things that the grave inconsistency and hypocrisy rings very loud and clear. Arizona, the bill would expand the Attorney General's authority to investigate and prosecute alleged ballot collection. Bills in New Jersey would require the Attorney General to create a voting fraud task force. The task force would comprise members of state, county, and municipal law enforcement agencies. It's determined by the AG's office, which means, of course, it's determined by the political party in charge. Bills that impose new criminal or civil penalties on election officials. So what I think is disastrous is the 4 Arizona bills that will allow election officials to be charged with felonies for unintended administrative mistakes, which means those felony convictions come with their disenfranchisement in the jurisdiction, their inability to now vote because of their particular unintended administrative mistakes. Or the Florida bill creating a new right of action that voters can sue local election officials who don't abide by election law. This private right of action uses a weapon against officials even for benign mistakes. The constitutional amendment being proposed in New Hampshire would establish 5 elected inspectors. If they find probable cause, they could petition the court to remove the official from the office. And then one Wisconsin bill would create a felony, a criminal offense for a member of state's election commissions for its office staff who failed to perform required voting list maintenance. Removing election officials. You can sue to remove, demonstrating less than satisfactory performance in Virginia. There are no clear standards for review of what standards constitute less than satisfactory performance. Election oversight commissions. We see these new commissions being created to basically replace, if you will, currently existing bodies that address the laws. And then transferring authority in Arizona, election officials object to any settlement offer the secretary receives. The bill will allow legislators to appoint their own. So what we have here is the impact of these laws is, quite frankly, a very frightening process in the current landscape. That these bills and these laws are being set to determine, if you will, or to examine or to set up a framework, not of protection of voters, not of integrity of the ballot box itself, but clearly about retaining political power at its will. The idea at the end of the day is that the impact of these, of course, is we're not going to be able to see the impact of these until after an election. That's the most damaging part. Once these bills are passed, you're not going to see the causal relationship until they have taken effect and you can see the deprivation, which means at that point it's too late, right? At that point, the election has passed. The issue is, how do you indicate, if you will, the correlation between the currently proposed legislation and the potential for disenfranchisement? And with the court's removal of the pre-clearance requirements with Shelby and all these other areas, there's no legal way to sort of challenge many of these things. And all we can hope for is that many of them don't sort of get out of committee, right? They don't get passed in their state legislatures, that they die on the committee floor. But even if they don't die on the committee floor, these bills and these other narratives around the voting process has created such a negative, if you will, feeling towards the faith in the process itself, that any election that occurs going forth is now tainted. There's no way that an individual walking into a ballot box, right, walking into a polling place, feels that now their vote is being accurately counted. Whether those are individuals who are believing in the big lie, or individuals who have no faith in the system, or, and this is the other piece that we often don't talk about, is when you have poll workers who don't understand the context of the law, right, the full scope, and create even more problems in that context. So I look forward to questions and discussion. I think it's one of those incredibly important issues that, quite frankly, if we don't address that in conjunction with gerrymandering and other sort of voting areas, right, we are clearly at a particular sort of, if you will, a crisis point in our democratic process. So,
Thank you, Professor Mitchell. I think you've given us even more things to be concerned and worried about than we were. But
sorry.
it's important. It's important to face reality. So we have a few good questions that we can take some. One question is, and it's a two-part question. Have all these bills you described passed to date? And more importantly, what do you see as a solution to the problems you identify across the US and especially in Missouri?
So I don't know if many of them have passed or not. I know, at least from the recounting that the Brennan Center has done, that these are, they do, and I would really encourage folks to take a look at the Brennan Center, because they do a monthly roundup of legislation to address what is currently, if you will, in the hopper and ready and sort of being proposed or being pre-filed. And so I imagine that many of these are being, so my first thing is, I don't know the answer to that, how many have been actually passed, adopted, or what have you. And quite frankly, I think many of them are what I would consider politicians' soundbite laws and proposals, that they sound good on the campaign trail, they sound good to constituents and stakeholders, even if there's no way that they're going to be passed. Right. And so they sound like, oh, we're being very tough on this process. So that's the first thing. The second thing is a far more complex question, is sort of, how do you address this across the nation in dealing with these particular issues? And quite frankly, it has to be that fighting it, advocacy groups and ally groups dealing with the right to vote in particular jurisdictions has to sort of take the fight basically on a grassroots level. I'm sure many of you were aware of the Stacey Abrams defeat in about fundraising, that she couldn't benefit from the same rule that the incumbent governor could, right? Well, why not? I mean, you're clearly not leveling the playing field for the political process if that's not allowed. But that has to be changed then by the legislature, right? That can't be changed, but that means getting in legislatures. And so it means, quite frankly, getting individuals who are going to vote, who are going to be favorable to such changes. The problem, of course, is that the deck is not stacked in one single area, right? And so I think if we are all sort of myopic about, oh, what are the voting rules that exist? Well, that leaves off issues around gerrymandering. That leaves off issues around who's getting put into office. That leaves off rules about access to voting in polling places. So you could create all these rules, right? And not have sufficient amount of resources in a particular jurisdiction and still suppress the vote in a very legal and quote unquote neutral way. Right. And I think that sort of often gets lost in the conversation.
Thank you for highlighting really the important elements of a crisis. You've put it really bluntly, but accurately. Let me look to see if maybe we can take, I think there's several questions, and I don't think we have time for them all. What we might do is send you a little list and you can do a sentence answering. Let me look through these. Some of them are just comments. Someone asked, is there no guarantee of a secret ballot?
Meaning,
Um,
if you cast your ballot, is there no way to determine if it's going to be secret or not? If it's not going to be revealed who you voted for?
Yeah, I'm not sure, Mari, or I didn't know if they were referring to.
Yeah, I was referring to the citizen audit bills, that how can a citizen demand to see a list of how people voted? I don't understand that.
Yeah, well, I think it's a matter of not seeing how folks voted, right? Because when we go into our polling place, we register, we get our ballot, and then we submit our ballot. Our names aren't on the ballot. And I think what they're trying to say is that a picture is taken of the ballot already, and now you get sort of an opportunity to sort of see that in conjunction with whatever's been in the polling, what's been collected. And so I think that's what the process is there.
And then and there's many good comments which we'll share with you. One that says these all make sense in the sense of making voting a privilege, not a right. So exactly what you're saying, suppressing the vote. I think that's the main questions I see. So if we have any additional crucial ones, we'll send them to you. Thank you so much for your passion and your knowledge and staying in the forefront. And we might consult you in the future as we desperately and diligently try to address some of these bills and keep them from being enacted in Missouri. But
Sure, I mean, that'd be fantastic. Hopefully we'll be able to reach out. I'll be able to reach out to some of you in my capacity as on the Missouri State Advisory Committee Commission, which often deals with voting rights. We dealt with voting rights issue, our last project. And I would also say that there are some folks who are probably better experts than I on voting issues in the state. But I'm certainly always willing to certainly participate and engage. So thank you.
That information was really helpful. And I was clicking my camera, taking shots so I can go back and look at those and share them. So thank you so much. And with that, we're going to move on to the next portion of our annual meeting, which is the presentation of the Eleanor Goodge Award for exemplary service to the League of Women Voters, Columbia, Boone County. And to present that award is Marilyn McLeod, who is the present president of the League of Women Voters Missouri, but the former president of our local league. Marilyn.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. We are so pleased to recognize Sharon Schneeberger as the recipient of the 2022 Eleanor Goodge Award for outstanding service to the League of Women Voters. Sharon has been a longtime member of the League, serving on our local league board for many terms. She's been very active with voter registration, and because of working with the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, she volunteered to be the Mid-Missouri coordinator of voter protection efforts during several recent elections. This year was the seminal year for redistricting. The state and our local league had worked for passage of the Clean Missouri Initiative. Sharon had already shown a keen interest in the process from the beginning. There was an event at the Columbia Library, I think many of you may have been there, when the Clean Missouri campaign had just begun. We had an opportunity to hear from Sean Nicholson, who was the state leader in that campaign, but he was not available to come to Columbia. Sharon jumped up and found a way at the time, which seemed revolutionary, to provide an interactive program with him at the Columbia Public Library. At that moment, she demonstrated not only her willingness to try new technology, and I think we were all sort of blown away by that, those of us who were there, but her keen interest in the redistricting process. She's continued to be our tech expert and quickly became our lead person on all our online events throughout the pandemic. Recognizing her interest in redistricting, Sharon was asked to serve as chair of the State League Committee on what we came to call fair redistricting. And she has shown herself to be an exemplary leader. Sometimes, you know, the right people are in the right place at the right time. And I have to say, Sharon, who's always done a great job, just sort of took this on as an example to us all about how to do things right. She organized the statewide committee, attended House and Senate bipartisan commission meetings, and testified even at the judicial panel, which finally had to oversee the state Senate maps. Sharon went further, developed a working relationship with the Institute for Computational Redistricting at the University of Illinois and its director to provide fair maps for Missouri, which she presented to the various commissions. And she also developed an excellent personal kind of working relationship with the Missouri Office of Administration. They knew her well. She would call them and ask questions all the time and followed through. Amazing. Her excellent leadership of league members across the state cannot be overstated. As a result of the committee and Sharon's leadership, the league gained a reputation around the state this year as a major organization working for fair maps for Missouri. We could not be prouder to recognize her excellent service to the League of Women Voters and to our state. And there is a certificate, and I have to ask Sharon, who is our tech, that we will present to her formally, personally, but right now tonight, it's just for you to see. In recognition of the Eleanor Goodge Award for exemplary service to the League, presented to Sharon Schneeberger, in recognition of her dedication and service to the League of Women Voters for many years of outstanding service as a board member, her excellent work on voter registration, and as Mid-Missouri Coordinator of Voter Protection, her outstanding contribution during the COVID pandemic as Zoom guru, and outstanding work and leadership as chair of the statewide League Committee on Fair Redistricting, which have all been critical contributions to the success of the League. Thank you so much, Sharon, for all that you do and all you have done.
I accept this award with great honor and appreciation. Can you see me?
Yes. Yes.
I would like to briefly respond to Marilyn's comments. I know that the women who preceded me in receiving the Eleanor Goodge Award were genuinely committed to making our democracy work. So I received this award in their spirit. It has been my pleasure to work alongside people in our league who are committed to voter registration and making the voter process work for all citizens. And Missouri Voter Protection is an inspiring statewide collaborative group who meets weekly to work on issues important to voting too. As to the Zoom guru, I must admit, when COVID began, it seemed that for our league to continue to exist, Zoom meetings were imperative, but an expert on Zoom use, I am not. I watched tutorials, asked questions, and bumbled along. For the chair of the Missouri League of Women Voter Committee on Fair Redistricting, any person would love being chair of that committed group. Committee members came from Columbia and across the state of Missouri. Really, we just found each other. Together, we researched, learned, presented, wrote, and showed up. We made each other wiser and more effective. We did what we could, and we hope that our work made a difference now and in the future. But mostly I think all of us, do what we do because we want our democracy to continue. Thank you for this award, an award to value our work for democracy.
Thank you. That was excellent.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Marilyn. And now we'll go ahead and proceed to the business part of our meeting with the election of officers and board members. And the nominations for the League of Women Voters board members for the coming year have been sent out to all the members. But I believe Sharon's going to put those on the screen share also, so you can see those. And the president, well, I continue my term. Marie continues her term as first vice president. Second vice president is Sharon Schneeberger. Secretary Carol Schreiber, Treasurer Elaine Martin, who's new. Ruth Millage was the previous treasurer. Then the elected board members would be Marilyn McLeod, serving her existing term, Elaine Blodgett, serving an existing term, Pam Springstield, serving an existing term, Renee Powell, serving an existing term, and then a renewal for Meredith Donaldson, Ruth Millage, Kate Canterbury, Diane Schuler, and a new board member, Linda Hedrick. And Hedrick was misspelled on one email attachment. So it's Headrick. Sorry about that, Linda. So what I need is a motion to accept the new board slate, either by acclamation, preferably if there are no further nominations from the floor. And then I might mention that we aren't voting on appointed board members, but we do have two new appointed board members, Zanab Nassim, who has been serving on the Education Committee, a wonderful young woman, and Tariana Samuels, who has also been, I think, Nunnally Samuels, who has also served on the Education Committee. Oh, and I'll mention, and this we don't vote on, I don't think, or maybe we do vote on it. Yeah, we do vote on it. The next year's nomination committee for 2023 would be Linda Lou Brown, Mary Ann Mace Dickerson, and Betsy Garrett. So
Barbara,
yeah.
We have a motion from Rachel.
Okay, Rachel, and that a motion by acclamation?
I move
Yes.
to accept the proposal slate by acclamation is what she said.
Oh, great. And do we have a second?
Meredith seconds.
Meredith seconds, okay.
And all those in favor, I think we can take, well, all those in favor, either raise your hand or raise your hand physically or raise your hand digitally.
Okay.
And I can't see, I just see the screen.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can add them.
Okay,
5, 6, 7, 8, 9,
if you stop screen
And
sharing, you'll be able to see gallery better.
Yeah, you can, if we can,
10 participants' hands are raised. You want me to stop?
if you, yeah, you can.
Yeah, okay.
Then
Now we
there's
might be able to see.
There's two for the, there's some double viewers, members, double.
Right, yeah.
So there's two for us. My husband's right here, just not in the screen.
Mhm. Got my hand up.
Some are up and some aren't.
12 participants raised their hand. And
Okay,
that's probably the icon hand, and some
Right.
of us have our real hand raised.
right. So I will look for the others, the 12 and
And add
13,
one more for Joe Donaldson.
15, 16, 17.
And I can't find my, I'm using my husband's
22.
computer. My hand, the chat, the hand raising.
I think everyone's getting their hands. How about we do anybody against it?
You do a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that sounds, Marilyn, yeah, let's wait a minute.
Please, please put your hand down if you're not against
Yeah.
it.
If you're.
Carol,
Yes.
Carol, this is Meredith. Did you add Joe Donaldson? He's on with me.
Well, yeah, I did, but some people have put their hands down. So if we can see who's against it, that would be probably the
Okay.
easiest.
Ava, your hand is up. Are you against it? And there,
Yeah,
okay,
So we have no one against it that I see.
right. So then the motion passes, and congratulations to
Oh, there you
the
are.
new board. And thank you for being willing to serve again. Your existing term or the new terms, and welcome to our new board members. Then we go on to the voting on the proposed budget for 2022, 2023, and Ruth Millage is going to do that section of our meeting. And I believe Sharon can put on the budget after we hear from Ruth. Ruth?
I believe Sharon is going to share her screen, and I will then speak to what we see on the budget. Thank you. First, I will direct your attention to the lower part of the screen where we have the line items for expenses. You will notice in the column under 2022/23 budget, that's the projected budget, that we have added more line items. That is because in an effort for even greater accountability, we are giving each committee their own line item and their own budget so that we can, as they incur expenses, we can account for those under those line items. And then that, can you scroll to the very bottom, Sharon, where we can see the total, which is $16,170 for total expenses. Then up in the top half, we have the same income line items we always have, and we predict a balanced budget of an income of $16,170. Are there any questions? Seeing none, I'll turn it back to Barbara for a vote on approval of this budget.
Thank you, Ruth. So could I have a motion and a second to approve the proposed budget for the coming year?
So moved.
Who was the so moved?
Vicki Wilson, it sounded like.
Oh, okay.
And a second?
Second.
Parker. Great. And Any further discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand either digitally or in person.
So,
Let's try.
And Carol's counting. Looks like
I think
everyone.
I think we have everyone. With
Okay,
me.
and all those opposed? Seeing none, the motion passes. Thank you. And thank you, Ruth, and thank you, David, and the Budget Committee, and Diane for working on that. And I think there's somebody else, several other people, I don't know everyone who is on the committee. Then we'll move to our two local studies. And to do that, Mari Scala will introduce the proposed statements, and then we'll take a vote on those, answer any questions. And we've had, I might say, and Mari probably will say this too, we've already had 2 membership meetings on both local studies, extensive ones, presenting the studies and asking questions. And then we had a consensus meeting and it passed. But Mari, go ahead and take over.
Okay. Yeah, as Barbara said, this is the end of a pretty long process. We had a study group for each one, and I'll mention the members of those one at a time. We had a membership meeting on February 2nd to provide explanation and answer questions. We had consensus meetings on March 28th for discussion, and the consensus was to support these and take them to you, the membership, at this annual meeting. Our hope is that they will then stimulate discussion at the state level and perhaps state adoption as well. So we'll start with the local control study. The people who worked on this were Elaine Blodgett, Donna Checkett, Barbara Hoppe, Marcy McGuire, Ruth Millage, Carol Schreiber, Diane Schuler, and myself as chair. We worked through a process where we defined numerous terms and studied what preemption and local control meant, explored the history thereof, and then identified many examples of preemptive Missouri laws that stifle local innovation. We identified related League of Women Voters of Missouri, or LWV-US positions, but were unable to find any other state, local, or national position like this. There are many positions on specific topics, but none on this particular broader issue. So the proposed position is that, well, there's a little typo there, but the LWV-CBC supports the following principle. State and federal legislation in general should provide a floor or a minimum standard for local policies that local governments can build on to fit their jurisdiction's needs and constituents' desires, but not a ceiling that prohibits local governments from policy innovation and testing. So that's the first one. The second one is—
I would suggest, Mari, that we vote on that one first while we're.
Oh, okay.
Can
Sure.
we do that? Can we vote on
Yeah,
that?
I'll turn it
before we
back
go
to
the
Barbara,
second?
so you
Okay.
can conduct the vote, Barbara. And I guess I'd be happy to make a motion that we approve.
Okay.
this.
And then,
Second,
Who was second?
Marilyn.
Okay.
okay, and any discussion, questions, further questions? Then all those in favor, please raise your digital or physical hand.
Looks like we have a unanimous, I believe.
Okay, great. Then I won't ask for oppose. Thank you. And then we'll move on to the second local study, legalization of marijuana. And Mari, do you
Okay.
want to take that one? And
Sure, I'll just do the brief summary, and if Dan has anything to add, he's more than welcome to chime in. The
Thank you.
second study was on legalizing responsible adult use of marijuana. And the study group members were Elaine Blodgett, Linda Lou Brown, Meredith Donaldson, Barbara Hoppe, Ruth Millage, Renee Powell, Pam Springsteel, Diane Schuler, and Dan Beats as chair. And the group explored the legal Missouri 2022 Adult Use Initiative. They looked at the history of the issue. They looked at other state LWV positions. And they examined a long list of questions, including, I'll just give you a sampling, is marijuana a gateway drug? And for each of these, they did research. So it was quite an impressive document. Does legalization lead to greater use by young people? Does it lead to more driving accidents and injuries and fatalities? What are the economic impacts? How does it impact the workplace? How does it relate to opioid abuse and addiction? Is it an exit drug? Is racism a factor in the criminalization of marijuana? What are the effects on law enforcement of this type of initiative? And what are the effects on the brains and bodies of people in states where this has already been done? And they arrived at the proposed position statements, short and sweet. The LWV-CBC supports the legalization, regulation, and taxation of responsible adult use of marijuana.
Thank you, Mari. And Dan has done a lot of work in leading this committee. And Dan, would you like to say a few words before we vote?
Well, yes, in fact, thank you for the opportunity. I have enjoyed working with the league for over 30 years, and I recall working with a committee that studied this topic that was chaired by Margaret Tyler, in fact, way back in the 90s. A lot has changed since then. Some 37 states have legalized medical use of marijuana, as indeed Missouri did in 2018 by an overwhelming vote of the people. Some 66% of voters endorsed that measure. A similar constitutional amendment is now being proposed, and within about 2 weeks from today, will very likely be submitted to the Secretary of State's office. Of course, the reason people propose constitutional amendments as opposed to statutory initiatives is because the legislature can and will, in many cases, immediately repeal or amend as it sees fit a statutory amendment. But cannabis prohibition is something that is a relatively new development. Of course, to most of us, it seems like it's always been this way. But in fact, cannabis has been used by human beings for thousands of years, and it's very likely to continue to be used by many people. What's proposed here, of course, is not to endorse marijuana use any more than the repeal of liquor prohibition was an endorsement of liquor use, but rather to endorse an alternative approach. The approach of criminal prohibition has resulted in many thousands of people's lives being disrupted and serious disabilities being inflicted on people, disabilities which include problems finding employment, finding a place to live, getting loans, student loans in particular, in many cases. It does not seem that those approaches have worked. If the goal was to reduce marijuana use, they certainly have not worked. What I think is intriguing, and what we now know with a decade of actual experience of marijuana legalization, by which we mean regulation and taxation, what we know is that there is no increase in use of marijuana, especially by young people, when it's legalized. What that means is that the trillions of dollars we've squandered on enforcing criminal prohibition really accomplished nothing. They didn't reduce use. I think that's a logical inference. When we repeal prohibition and use does not increase, I think we can infer that the efforts at prohibition enforcement really didn't even decrease marijuana use, but they certainly did a lot of damage to individuals. The ACLU has published a couple of landmark studies which have established beyond doubt that not only are the roots of cannabis prohibition deep in racism. But in fact, today, the enforcement of cannabis prohibition continues in an extremely racist manner. The disparity in the numbers of African Americans arrested for cannabis offenses is dramatically higher than their numbers in the population would indicate should be the case, and especially given the fact that by all accounts, European Americans and African Americans use cannabis at almost exactly the same rate. Yet in Missouri, for instance, 2.6 times as many African Americans are arrested for marijuana offenses. In fact, we squander vast amounts of public resources, the limited resources of law enforcement in particular. Our tax money and their time are wasted. In fact, even today, reliably, it is reported that there are more arrests for marijuana possession than for all violent crimes combined. It is a terrible evil. It is something that we will recognize, I think, within a very few years as a tragic mistake. Again, 10 years ago, in 2012, Washington State and Colorado became the first jurisdictions to legalize in our country. We now have a total of 19 jurisdictions, including our nation's capital, which have legalized, regulated, and taxed adult use. The results of those actions have been almost entirely positive. I will stop, but I'll be happy to respond to any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you, Dan. Does anyone have any questions? If not, we'll go ahead to voting. We need a motion and a second to approve the statement and position on study 2 of the legalization of marijuana. I have a motion and a second.
I'll make the motion to accept.
I'll second.
Who was second?
Rachel Breaker.
Okay, Rachel.
So, in any discussion or further questions? Then can I have a show of hands, physically or digitally, for those in favor of adopting that position? We'll give a.
It looks to me like it again is unanimous.
Great. Thank you, Carol. And thank you, Dan and Mari. And now we'll go on to the next item on our business meeting agenda. And that's thanking the Friends of the League of Women Voters. Every year we do a list of people who have participated in some way with the League and organizations. And this year, despite the pandemic, we've been very active and we've collaborated a lot with different people and organizations, as you can see. So we have the speakers and co-sponsors at forums that's on the screen right now. We participated in the Vigil for Democracy on Zoom and with Missouri Voter Protection that Sharon talked about. And then we had our forums and had guest speakers, Janet Thompson from the city or from the county, and then the city, David Lyle. We had Violet Vanderhaar, Songs of Democracy, and it should also be Mike Zadowski was our main speaker for the nature school. There's a more current one than this. Let's see. So I don't want to, and then we had our 10 lunch and learns and listed all the participants and the organizations. I won't go through those in detail, but you can look at them. And then we also had, last but not least, the Columbia Public Library here, who we have been collaborating with even more than in past years during this Zoom. And they were so helpful in helping us get the hybrid forum, candidate forums and issue forums this year. And so we're really looking forward to collaborating with the library in the future and being able to hold hybrid meetings, as well as doing the lunch, continuing to do the lunch and learn with them. And then, you know, we always thank Paul Pepper and Jane Mauser for publicizing the league and what we're doing. So thank you to all our friends. And then I don't know if there's any questions, I would go on to the annual report to members.
There's a question in the
Yeah.
chat, Barbara.
Okay.
It says, was the March 8th item from Mr. Seawood recorded, and is the recording available?
It was
On
recorded.
our YouTube channel.
Okay, it's still on there. Okay.
It is on there, yes.
Thanks for noting that. Okay, then we'll move on to the annual report. So every year we do an extensive report of what the League of Women Voters has done in the past year. And this year the report is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages long, mostly single spaced. So we've been very active and engaged, although we're still we've been mostly in the pandemic. It's lightening up and we have been able to do hybrid and meet occasionally. So I can just sort of highlight some things, and then if there's any questions, we can take those. So I hope everyone will take a look at the report. And it's just a good history, you know. Sometimes you're in the midst of doing things that you really forget all the things that have been done and how many things the league is working on and how many people are working on it. So let's see, if you can scroll back, Sharon, I'll just, you can pass that. And people are, I wrote a president message that people can look at their leisure. You can go to the next screen. There you go. So we have been able to participate in voter education activities, both on Zoom and in person, as it was safe to do so. And then, of course, Sharon Schneeberger has led, being very active and led not only the local league, but the state league and leagues throughout the Missouri in testifying and being very active on the redistricting. Zonia Burke has taken over as the education committee chair and has really been enthusiastically working with the high school students, and she'll have a good report for the next voter. Let's see, we've obtained a QR code this year, which is something new. Then we've had many public forums, and you can look at those: minority youth inequities and justice. Mike Sgriggs presented on the Parks and Rec Department, and we had the ballot issues and the city issues, and the 2 local studies, and then 10 lunch and learns, and I won't go through those. And let's see, any other highlights. We were able to march in the parade at MU, and it was really encouraging and refreshing. All the groups of young college students and other students, as well as older people, who just cheered us on. So that was a good PR, and being in person was an extra special thing. We were able to have a picnic. Again, a little bit of social activity and all the work. Let's see, and we've attended, the state meetings. Had the Founders Day event, which was really good, with Mike Zlowski from the Nature School. And then I wanted to mention that we did previously give out the Liz Schmidt Community Service Award to the Food Bank of Central and Northeast Missouri, accepted by Lindsay Lopez, and then the Outstanding Citizen Award. Let's see. So anyways, does anyone have any questions on that? It's still, though we've done a lot, there just seems so much that still needs to be done, especially hearing from Professor Mitchell and all the attacks on the voting process.
You might highlight Ava's work on the voter.
Yes. Oh, did I
No,
miss?
it's right. No, it's right on the end, but I
Okay.
would definitely
Yes,
give a big shout out to Ava.
Right, yes, right. I thought I did that earlier, but yeah, Ava has diligently, month after month, gathered our articles and put them in a good format and interacted with us. So thank you, Ava, so much for doing the voter. We don't know what we'd do without you. We can't do without you. So thank you, Carol, for highlighting that. Any other points or questions? Vicki Wilson, thank you. Impressive list. Yeah, it took a while to gather all that together. Thank you, Carol, and others for helping contribute for what your committees had done, and then basically going through our newsletters and gathering, looking back. It's a good thing to do, not only for an organization, but probably personally too, to look back through the year and see what you have done, what you have accomplished, and what you have yet to accomplish.
It's kind of like doing your income tax.
Yeah, very timely. I hope that we put that behind us. So without any questions on that, I would just like to welcome the new board. I didn't know if our two new members wanted to say anything. Linda Hedrick, would you like to say a few words? She's muted, so I guess not. And then Elaine Martin, is Elaine here? Oh, there's Linda. I think she's.
Yeah, I'm terribly sorry. I just had to struggle around to try to find the mute button. If you think that after all this time of Zoom meetings, we'd have that nailed, but it seems different times. I just want to say how excited I am and pleased to be joining the board, and really hope to. I've got a lot to live up to with all this amazing work that everyone's done over the years. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We look forward to working with you, and we've appreciated your participation up to now. It has been really encouraging and good, and I'm sure you'll be a great asset to the league. And then is Elaine Martin?
Elaine is in Massachusetts with her first grandbaby.
Okay, so Elaine won't be here. And then we will go on to special announcements or announcements. And first, Marilyn McLeod would like to say something about the coming up play, which is really exciting, and I can't wait for it to be here.
Yes, normally well, not normally, well, maybe normally, we'd have a play that we would all gather the first week of June and have a great evening. Well, we're going to try to do that again. only it's going to be on Zoom. And it's a special performance that is a film. So I'll explain a little bit about it if I may. Now I'll just say also, you just approved a budget that included fundraising of a certain amount. So you have to keep that in mind, because that's ultimately what we would hope to raise from this particular event. So on June 1st, we will be able to watch a play called Tea for Three. And it is a one-woman show, which was an off-Broadway show. And the actress whose show it was has a film of it and has given us the rights to show it. And so on June 1st at 7, we will gather as if we were gathering at the theater. Right? But for those of us who remember the night when the tornado sirens went off right before the play, or who remember the pouring down rain that happened while we were gathering tickets, I think Meredith and I were out there. We don't have to worry about that unless there is a tornado warning and we have to go to our basement. But we can do this in our own home. So we'll gather at 7 and make sure everybody's on Zoom. And then what will happen is we will give everyone the link to the film so you can watch it on your own screen, either on a computer, or if you are smarter than me, you can project it onto a TV. And then it's a little over an hour, and then we will reconvene after the film, and the actress will be live with us to talk about it. And the film is a depiction of 3 first ladies, Lady Bird, Pat Nixon, and Betty Ford. And a number of us saw a clip of it, and it's very charming. It's funny and sad, and just a nice mix. We think you will enjoy it. So what we will do is have tickets to be purchased or underwriters, just as we've done in the past. And we will put this information in the voter, and then we'll also send a follow-up message to you. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. I hope you will all plan to attend. You can be in your pajamas, you can drink your own wine, and we will miss the hors d'oeuvres. But I thought about this, that for those of us who've ever been at the play, you know how crowded that room would get with the food and the wine. And so with COVID, I don't know that we would really want to do that.
Right, yeah. So everyone will need to spread their food in front of the show and watch it, but I'm really looking forward to it. And if you haven't looked at the trailer, I think we'll have the link probably on the voter so they can look at it, but it's really excellent. The actress is very nationally professional and known. And then having the opportunity to ask questions and talk with her afterwards will be really unique and interesting and special. So thanks, Marilyn, for heading that. I look forward to it. And then I think Pam has an announcement.
Yes, I do. The Luella Committee is working again. Our goal is to name the next elementary school after Luella St. Clair Moss. Among the long list of her accomplishments was that she was the first woman on the Columbia School Board. In the future, we will be asking that each of you write a letter of support to the Columbia School Board for Luella St. Clair Moss.
Thank you, Pam. And I wanted to mention, just highlight that we are looking for a new chair of the Energy and Climate Committee. That's a very important committee. It's done amazing work in the past under the chairmanship of both Dick Parker and previous to that, Wynn Caldwell. Dick is stepping down and wants to pass the banner, whatever it is, along to someone else. And climate change is so important. And the league was really instrumental in getting the first renewable energy ordinance with the city, and then to continue to push it further. So this has been an area that the league has really had a really strong impact on the city. So if you're interested in either being on the committee or on the committee or chairing it, please contact me. We could really use your help. Thank you, Dick, and for all your leadership and work on this, as well as Wynn Caldwell.
Barbara,
Yes.
this is Meredith. We also need a new chair for the Hospitality Committee. And I will report that we have a new member who's volunteered for the Hospitality Committee, another new member for the Climate Change, but neither of them would be chair. So if you're willing to be chair, you already have the existing members and two very strong members who've stepped up. That's
Meredith,
hospitality.
I'm not resigning from the Hospitality
you're
Committee.
not.
It's
Oh, it's
the
a
fundraising
fundraising.
committee.
I'm sorry, back up, fundraising. Did you get that, Barbara?
Yes.
Okay, I had that backwards.
Okay.
I don't
and,
have anyone for the fundraising, but I'll work on it. So if you volunteer to be chair, we'll be sure you have a committee.
Barbara,
Yes.
I know Dick would like to highlight this coming Sunday.
Yes.
for
Earth Day.
Putting together a climate.
He's already urged us to come.
I think I already did that when,
Well, it was so brief, I don't think people really heard it.
Uh-huh. So,
we really do need to persuade the city council to achieve 100% renewable energy for our utility, which is owned by us, by 2030, if we are going to do our part to solve the world's problem.
So come and see Dick's exhibit at the energy fair,
right.
climate fair, Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon.
Sunday afternoon, the Earth Day fair, yes.
All right. Are there any other announcements? If not, I want to do a final welcome to the new members of the board and to all the board. And I've already sort of individually gone through that, but it's listed on the agenda. So I want to formally do that. Thank you, new members for joining us, and existing members for continuing on the board. And with that, do I need a motion and a second to adjourn? I think so.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Marilyn?
All those in favor, raise your digital or physical hand. I don't think. And thanks for that, like that. And seeing, and all those opposed, do the same. Being none. The annual meeting is adjourned, and hopefully we plan next year on having a hybrid meeting for in-person for those who want it, and Zoom for those who would like it also. So thank you so much, all of you, for coming and participating, and for all your work.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
And
Bye-bye.
bye.